Welcome, Simcha Fisher. Thank you for joining us to the first line. This is indepthnh.org's new feature interviewing New Hampshire authors, of which you are our first, and I'm grateful to you for that. And we're talking about your book, The Sinner's Guide to Natural Family Planning. It's a great title. I love good titles like that.
Thank you.
And let me read your bio. Simcha Fisher is an award-winning columnist who regularly contributes to America Magazine, Parable Magazine, and the Catholic Weekly. She lives with her husband and 8 of their 10 children and several animals in a surprisingly small house in New Hampshire. How do you do it? How do you fit everybody in?
Well, the main part is that they all go to school now. We used to homeschool, and it was a little bit more ridiculous back then, but life is somewhat less ridiculous now. we we went and bought the house with the small house with the big yard. That's what we were focusing on, and that was a good choice. So
A big yard is important, most certainly. Most certainly. We have a big one for our dogs. So, all right, we're going to just dive right in. I love the book. I love reading something that I don't know anything about or I haven't explored in any way. And this was hitting both of those points for me. And we're going to start with chapter 1. You write, why doesn't the church just make a list? When Catholics talk about NFP, specifically about legitimate reasons to use NFP to avoid pregnancy, someone always asks rather plaintively why the church doesn't clear up all the confusion. That's your first line in your book. So, what is NFP and why are you plaintive about it?
it is a bit of a niche topic, and I it's something that people who aren't it's kind of inside baseball. So for Catholics who are practicing Catholics and who take their faith seriously, we don't use contraception. We use natural family planning, which just means being aware of your body's natural spells of fertility and infertility. And if you don't want to get pregnant, you don't have sex at the times when you're likely to get pregnant. And if you do want to get pregnant, then you take advantage of those times. So where the plaintiveness comes in and where the controversy sometimes comes in is that, with Catholics, we definitely like to argue. We like to make problems where there not necessarily need to be problems, just for whatever reason. So when what happens a lot of the time is that the church tells its adherents that you use natural family planning if you have a good reason to use natural family planning, and there's some argument about what constitutes a good reason. And a lot of my book deals, a certain portion of my book deals with how you tell what constitutes a good reason or not. How you get to a point of deciding what constitutes a good reason. And there's a lot of extremists not a lot of extremists, but a certain amount of noisy extremists who make themselves seem more numerous than they probably actually are, who make it seem like you have to be about to check yourself into a mental hospital, or you have to be, existing on millet or something like that before you can even consider not having more children, or you have to be actually have some sort of fatal disease or something like that before you could. Everybody's seen the Monty Python sketch where the woman is doing the dishes and, oh no, I just had another baby, somebody get that.
That's hilarious.
Guys, I have 10 children. Like, I understand for a lot of people that's a bit of a conversation stopper, and they're like, what is this lady telling me about how to decide about family size? But we can talk about that if you want to. But anyway, to answer your question though, I wanted to get out of the way the question of like how can we actually use natural family planning? When can we use it? How do we decide when we can use it? And yeah, so that's what I wanted to answer in my first in my first chapter, and sort of get that out of the way, and to sort of introduce the idea that the church has the reputation, even among Catholics, of being a lot more strict and stern and oppressive and sort of clamping down on people than it actually is. And that's really, if you actually go in and read the documents, I mean, the actual authoritative teaching documents of the church, which I did because I thought, well, if I'm going to write a book on it, I better read the documents. I better know what I'm talking about, rather than just going on internet forums. I better know what I'm talking about here. And what I discovered over and over again is if you read carefully, a lot of the time, the church is telling you, like, yeah, there are some basic rules, but the rules are there to help you to discover your own humanity, to discover the humanity of your spouse, and to discover a closer relationship with God. And that's the point.
How bad can that be?
Well, it's hard. It's hard. I'm not going to lie to anybody. It's not easy. It's not a short, easy path. But the rewards can be very, very great and rich. They can be. So that's what the book is about.
That's awesome. And you're right. But when we've already rejected contraception and are trying to figure out, excuse me, I'm going to go back to chapter 1. No, excuse me. You write about when we've already rejected contraception and are trying to figure out whether or not to take the plunge and possibly conceive a child, things get muddier. And it seems like it's a hard decision that you're writing about to use NFP. And how do you what makes it muddy? Are you talking plaintive and you're talking muddy? What makes it muddy?
Yeah, well, I mean, what I was specifically referring to there was the sort of knots that people can tie themselves into when they are asking themselves, do I have a serious enough reason? There's a lot of people out there, again, not really a lot of people, but a small amount of noisy people who believe that it's always going to be the holier choice, and it's always going to be the more that you're always going to be trusting God more if you have more children, and that if that having a bigger family is always a sign of holiness, and having a bigger family is always a sign of just sort of being more Catholic, and that's sort of it's sort of an old-fashioned idea that's sort of making a resurgence, I guess, and you'll find it in more traditionalist communities. And I like big families. I come from a big family. My husband comes from a big family, and I have a big family. I would be delighted if my own children decided to have big families themselves. But I have most certainly learned the hard way, that there are all kinds of good families, and there are all kinds of good reasons for doing things, and there are all kinds of people in the world, and there are all kinds of relationships that people have with God and with each other, and that the thing that God is calling one person to do is different from the thing that God is calling another person to do. Right. And the thing that God is calling one person to do at one point in their life is very different from what he's calling them to do a year later, or 6 months later, or 10 years later, or something like that. And it's not, because this is what happens when you're having a relationship with a real person, which God is. It's not, one of the things that I try to do in my book is to get people, because this is something I had to learn myself, to get people away from thinking about spirituality as a kind of a checklist, or a kind of a mechanistic thing that you could do, that you could check off the boxes, or that you could make sure you're following all the rules, or coloring in all the lines and doing all the things right, checking all the boxes, pulling all the levers right, and getting the right results. Because when you're talking about love, and when you're talking about sex, and when you're talking about families, and when you're talking about religion, it's not that kind of thing at all. And if you're acting that way, you're doing it wrong. You're absolutely doing it wrong. And I'm not here. I'm a faithful Catholic. I'm not here to tell people, don't worry about those stupid rules. Those are old fashioned. We're going to throw those out the window. Like, I'm not, that's not what I'm doing. But I'm asking people to have a different understanding of what we're actually trying to arrive at, I guess, and what can happen to you in the process of it.
I found it a blatantly honest book, really, just easy to read and just telling it like it is. So And then I'm wondering, do we have a little bird that's in the background that's
Oh,
singing us?
I'm so used to hearing him. I didn't even notice. This is one of
Oh,
our animals.
the soundtrack. Okay, well, let's jump up to chapter 4, and you write, among the small fraction of married Catholics who don't contracept, there are two camps, those who space pregnancies by practicing NFP, and providentialists who may or may not actively pursue pregnancy, but do nothing to postpone it. Can you explain those two camps for us?
Yeah, well, again, this is kind of inside baseball. I mean, this is going to be,
I know,
and
but that's what
yeah,
the book is all about. And I think that this is an opportunity for folks who may have never heard about NFP or have heard about it and thought it's hard and impossible and doesn't work.
yeah,
You lay it out very differently.
yeah. Well, so as I mentioned, I mean, most Catholics actually do not use NFP. Most Catholics just either don't know about or just reject church teaching on it and just go ahead and use contraception. So
Oh,
that's that's
they're
although
using contraception.
it is a growing number of people who use natural family planning for a variety of reasons because this is sort of a field from their question, but because a lot of women, even secular women, are starting to get really tired of the other things that contraception is doing to their bodies. Either they don't like what it's doing, they don't like what it's doing to their bodies just biologically, they don't like what it's doing to their emotions, or they don't like what it's doing to the environment. So there are some reasons that people who aren't Catholic at all and have no ethical or moral problems with it are actually much more interested in. I did a survey about this. I did a long story about this for American Magazine. It's there's a lot of purely secular people who are using natural family planning just because they're really tired of of what's been happening to them and what's the way that they've been treated by doctors for the last 30, 40, 50 years. Anyway, setting that aside for the moment, among Catholics who do reject contraception purely for moral reasons, some of them, as I said, use natural family planning when they want to space out their pregnancies, when they want to. And the thing about natural family planning is that it's not one of the benefits of it, sometimes a benefit, sometimes not necessarily a benefit, is that you reassess it every month because most women have a menstrual cycle every month. So you get a chance every single month to decide, do we want to have a baby? Do we want to have a baby? Do we want to have a baby? So it's something that you have to kind of there's no like set it and forget it with natural family planning. You have to keep on deciding over and over and over again. So
choices are made. You can make a choice.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and sometimes that can be difficult because you can decide one thing and then in the heat of the moment decide, actually, never mind.
Never mind, right?
But the point being that you can decide, you can make that choice over and I mean, my youngest child is almost 8 years old and we've been using natural family planning. I might change my mind and have another baby, but I'm almost 48 years old. I am exhausted. So
well, when you wrote the book, you had 9 children,
yeah,
and now there are 10 children. So
that turned out to be a pretty good number, and
yeah.
especially one particular kid. She's so,
That's funny. We'll get into that later. Can you give us a thumbnail sketch though of what how do you conduct natural family planning? What do you
there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. You can I mean, do you want to hear like the nitty-gritty of it, like the actual like logistical details of it, or
I think a short version, but yeah, I want nitty-gritty, I think.
Okay, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different biological markers that a woman's body shows when she is ovulating. I mean, you can test hormones in urine. So you can buy test strips, on Amazon or at Walmart.com, and there's a number of different monitors on the market. So basically, you pee on a stick just like you would for a pregnancy test, You stick it into the monitor, it goes beep, 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 and it shows you like, is your estrogen rising? And if your estrogen is starting to rise, and then it starts to test for an LH surge, and your LH surge is right around the time when you're ovulating. And then if you want to confirm it, there's a different test strip that you can buy, which tests for progesterone, which is only present if you've already ovulated. So it's there's been a tremendous amount of technological advances, and a lot of this has come about because people have been having trouble getting pregnant lately. So a lot of the technology has come about to help people get pregnant, and then people are sort of retrofitting it to help them avoid pregnancy if they want to. And there's a lot of literature about this. It's not intended to avoid pregnancy, but Catholics are smart and they can figure out how to do it. So,
What was the old-fashioned name for it, though? I remember, and I'm old enough to remember, there was a different name, not in that, and
probably the rhythm method. That's
the
probably
rhythm method, right. And I remember everybody saying, "No, that doesn't work." And this is back in the 70s, so
yeah, it could work if you have. It could work if you're willing to, if you have an extremely regular cycle, or if you're willing to take some chances. The rhythm method depends on you having an extremely regular cycle and on you ovulating at the same time.
And who does that?
Nobody does.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And for some people, I mean, going back to your original question, which you asked some time ago, which I did not answer yet. I mean, for some people, if you're a providentialist, I mean, they wouldn't be using natural family planning at all. But the idea of providentialist is that you don't do anything. You just accept what comes. You just decide, hey, I'm married. I like babies. I'm in it to win it, or whatever. And I'm going to take as many babies as come along, which a lot of people assume that I do because I have 10 children. But let me tell you, if I were a providentialist, I would probably have, I don't know, 17 children. And I'm not even kidding. Like, I get pregnant very, very easily.
So, it seems like it, but you're right. You're just throwing caution to the wind in that regard, and that seems a little more chaotic to me in planning life.
Right. Yeah. And some people are, some people are comfortable with that. Some people will use breastfeeding to space pregnancies, and for some people that works well. That doesn't work great for me because for various reasons. But for some people, if they're breastfeeding on demand through the night, they can space out their pregnancies to every 3 years or something like that. And that just makes sense for them. If they're home with their kids, they're homeschooling, they don't mind having a baby attached to them all the time, they like it, it works well for them, why the heck not? It's a lifestyle.
Exactly.
People can do what they want as long as they're not being pushed into it. It's just like anything else. It's just like, I mean, I know people who are pushed into contraception, and that's not the lifestyle that they want, but they're being pushed into it. So, it cuts both ways. There's crappy people at every level of life, at every strata of society. You can find crappy people treating each other poorly, and guess what, that is in the Catholic Church as well. So
the peer pressure or whatever is, what do you mean you're having another baby? Just, it just, that comes from somebody else, but it's an internal decision. It's a spousal decision also.
Right. And that's really the essence of ideally, that's what natural family planning is supposed to help us achieve. I mean, what natural family is supposed to help us achieve is planning our pregnancies. That's what it's supposed to help us achieve. But secondarily, what it is supposed to help us achieve is to make it be a more cooperative decision. Because with contraception, it's just one usually the woman, sometimes it's the man, but it's usually the woman who has to do something, and there's usually some drawback to it. There's usually, like, I know so many women who have migraines, or they have no sex drive, or they gained 30 pounds, or they have blood clots, and they just and because when they turned 13, their moms put them on the pill because it was the responsible thing to do, and no told them that you didn't have to do this, or they put them on, NuvaRing or something like that, or because everybody told them this is the responsible thing to do. And obviously you're going to be having sex, and obviously, nobody ever told them that you could expect more for yourself. You can expect to have some say. You can expect to decide what happens to you. You can expect, you can expect to decide whether or not you actually want to have sex. You can you can expect all kinds of things. You can hope for all kinds of things. Nobody told a lot of women these things.
But you're saying that women are choosing, or parents are choosing nowadays, whatever nowadays means to you, that my 13-year-old who is now having her period, needs to go on a pregnancy canceling device of some sort.
Yep.
Is that a trend? I haven't heard anybody sing about it or say anything about it.
Yeah, that's been the case for over a decade, I would say, maybe longer
really?
than that. And in some places, you do not actually have to tell your parents. I mean, it's a thing that the girl can go, it can happen. So this varies by state, but the school nurse can arrange for this to happen. This is something that can vary by state, and this is a cultural thing too. This is something that I want to emphasize, because it's whether we're talking about going on the pill or getting something, getting some kind of contraceptive implanted in your body, or whether it's just, because people talk about a guy wearing a condom as if this is some kind of like tremendous advance and like a wonderful heroic thing that a man can do. If he's like a really, really good guy, he's gonna be a good guy and wear a condom, as if like that's
I know.
Like, she's still 15 years old. This still shouldn't be happening. Like, this is still,
no, I had no idea.
It's not great. It's not great, because and this is really a whole other. I have a 40-minute speech about this, actually, which I will say for another time. But I think that a big problem is that people have elevated the idea of in response to there being, the Me Too movement has made people talk about whether or not we have consent or not, right? And this is a really important conversation to have, because obviously
it's a very important conversation.
Consent. It's extremely important to have consent, but we've elevated consent to be the highest good. And what people are finding is that I think that people are not asking themselves, like, well, what should I consent to this? Why am I consenting to this? Because people are consenting to things because they have been brought up to believe that there's no particular reason to consent to something or not to consent to something, or because they're pressured to consent into it. And people are never taught to evaluate why they're consenting to something, or whether they should consent to something, or whether there's a good reason to consent to something and a bad reason to consent to something. And it's just sort of kicking the can down the road, and we're in a sort of cultural wasteland where people have emptied sex of its meaning inside of marriage and outside of marriage. And this is pretty far afield of the what we were.
It's all right, but it's leading into my next question, I'll be honest with you. So
I mean, and what I mean, the idea of girls going on contraceptives, I mean, when I said that ship has sailed, people aren't even having sex anymore, because by the time they reach their 20s, they're burnt out on it. Because
you mean they've had so much sex already?
They've had so much, they've watched so much porn, they've watched so much extreme porn, that they're burnt out on it and they're not interested in it anymore. And they don't, and they're turned off by it, and they're not, and they're just kind of, and they don't have an appetite for it anymore.
That's too bad.
Well, too bad.
That's a bad thing.
And this is, and again, to sort of bring it back to the topic actually at hand, I mean, this is one of the reasons why some people, for purely non-religious reasons, are looking to natural family planning as a lifestyle, because it just takes the body as it is. And this is something that, you know, people want to do in general. They don't want to be pumped full of microplastics, and they
Right,
don't
right.
want to be surrounded by screens all the time, and they don't want to be artificial. They don't want to be artificial, and they don't want to be manipulated in any way. And they don't want it in their food. They don't want it in their brains, and they don't want it in their sex lives. And
It's all
and
the natural movement, the
yeah,
natural movement. Interesting. Well, I'm going into chapter 7 right now, and this is what you wrote. I love this. Is it really okay to laugh about sex?
oh,
Great title, I think. That's the title of the chapter. And then I'll go further. If you can't laugh about sex, at least some of the time, then you're doing it wrong. I love that you wrote that, and you made it funny, and it's informative. And just would you share why you wrote that chapter, and what point do you really want to make on that?
yeah, yeah. Oh boy. Well, that's something that I wrote. I originally wrote that because at the time I was working for a Catholic newspaper that was the audience for it was pretty conservative, and I used to get a lot of pushback for talking about sacred things in a less than reverent fashion. And you know, I was brought up. My parents didn't join the Catholic Church, and I was 4 years old, so I was not brought up with a long Catholic tradition at all. My parents are Jewish. My parents were brought up as secular Jews, and they went through this long odyssey of different religions. They were Buddhists. They briefly joined a cult. They were, you know, they kind of sampled this and that before they arrived at the Catholic Church. And when they became Catholics, they stayed there until they died. And, you know, presumably they're still there. So,
Of course, you mean in heaven, right? Yeah.
so I didn't have any of that baggage that sometimes builds up, that some people have, where, oh, we don't speak about these things, or we must not laugh about these things. Like when I was growing up, you could laugh about anything. Like everything was fair game. Not only was anything fair game, but that is how you deal with difficult matters. You know, I mean, we were laughing at my parents' funeral. Like that's how you deal with things. Not that you don't cry also, you know, I mean, that's also how you deal with things. But the idea that there are some things that are simply too important to laugh about, it's like sometimes that's the only thing you possibly can do. Because and it's funny to me, because if you read the Gospels as a Jew, it's full of jokes. It's absolutely full of jokes that you might not get if you're a Gentile. Which
Interesting. Okay.
yeah, I mean, if you read it in the right tone of voice, Jesus was a really sarcastic guy, and a lot of people don't get the jokes that he was telling because they don't read it in the right tone of voice, and they think of him as this sort of like extremely solemn, extremely uptight, extremely serious guy. And I really don't think he was. Like, and I'm not just saying that to be edgy or something. Like, I genuinely don't think that he was. I think,
Yeah.
you know, and
I love that. That's a really lovely revelation on your part about Jesus.
yeah, and I feel that people are just as people are sort of losing out on things that they could gain about the Gospels and about religion in general by refusing to see the humor in it. I mean, the same thing is certainly true about sexuality, and it's a strange thing to me. And I don't know if it's some sort of like American Protestantism creeping in or what, but, or, you know, I mean, like Puritanism, you know what I mean? That the idea that this is something that's so very important and serious that we can't laugh about it. I'm like, what are you guys doing?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's like, it's the funniest thing in the world. Like,
Yes, it can be quite humorous.
like if you're taking it too seriously, like, I do not understand how. I don't know how to say it for people who don't get the joke. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, to me, it's partially God's way of keeping us from taking ourselves too seriously, you know, because and that's actually a really important aspect of how to have a good relationship with your spouse, you know, sexually and otherwise, is not taking yourself too seriously and being willing to say, like, all right, well, you know, I guess I'm an idiot. Like, you show me, then you tell me, you know, I'm an idiot. Show me how to do it better.
Yeah.
Like, I got that wrong. Let's try it again. Or
Yes.
like, you know, like that was ridiculous. Let's set that aside and try again next time, or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
You know?
Or
I mean,
I don't want to do that ever again, possibly.
exactly, exactly. Or just, I mean, if you're not willing to put yourself out there, you are not going to have a long, happy marriage. You're not going to
I
have a,
agree.
you know, that's just, it's not gonna work. You know, I mean, it's like the old cliche about the very tallest trees that are able to bend. You know, they don't get that tall by being stiff and not being and not bending. You know, so it just be that way.
Married 46 years, and it's always been a big part of our marriage is humor, and him make fun of me, I make fun of him, or whatever, or just the kind of comedy that we like to watch, or it's just keep it light. And it's helped us last for a long time. So
Yeah.
okay, we're into chapter 8 now. And you say gradually more and more Catholics have become willing to talk openly about NFP with each other, and that's been great. So it's been 10 years since you published the book, and
Yep.
we're talking about it, opening it into a new general audience, because that's who is going to be seeing this on indepthnh.org. And why are you talking about it? And what was your expectation of the book? And did you fulfill those expectations? This is 10 years now. It's
Yeah.
time for the recap, right? Of how it worked.
Yeah. Well, it's still selling. I mean, you know, which is
Awesome.
not passive income. It's always good. It's interesting because when I was a newlywed, you know, 25 years ago, there was no social media, and there was no, there was the internet, and there was a little bit of there was a little bit, you know, there was sort of some online discussion boards and things, and I was grateful for that because I was able to find some people that I could talk to. There was certainly nobody in my in-person life that I could talk to. I'm going to talk to my mother about it, you know.
She didn't know anyway, probably.
Right? Yeah, I mean, maybe she did. I don't know, but
Well, maybe your mother, my mother would know.
yeah. um, it the conversation certainly changed a lot because of the advent of social media, and then, I mean, you know, the sort of the landscape of how people talk about things has changed so drastically and so quickly in the last 10 years because of social media. The things that people are willing to talk about, the things that people consider acceptable to talk about with strangers, has changed so very quickly. And you know, that's been good in a lot of ways, because you can find, um you can talk about things that you need to talk about. I mean, there are, you know, but at the same time, as we know, social media has been a double-edged sword, because just as you can find communities of like-minded people who are willing to help you, you can also find lots and lots of people who have bad information, and lots of people who are malicious and want to hurt you, and um just, you know, terrible people out there who can have an outsized effect on you. I mean, I mentioned a couple of times the people who are a small community, but they're very loud. You know, I think most people who have spent any time on social media have had that experience of having, you know, just a small group of loud and malicious people having an outsized effect on their life if you let it. And it's really easy. It's really easy, especially in the last couple of years, because people have been stuck at home so much. And a lot of people have turned to social media just for companionship, you know, and it's difficult to make sure that you're surrounding yourself with people who are having a positive influence on your life. So I forgot what your
Yes.
question was.
No, your expectations 10 years later, but
Oh,
you're right about, you've got to keep positive people around you.
yeah.
You know, it is so important that you don't keep those negative things that you're taking in all this negative stuff, because you would eventually then have to get it out of yourself. You have to, I don't know how you do it. You know, sometimes you scream it out or whatever, but negativity is not good. Anyway, your expectations.
Yeah, that was one of the goals of my book, was to be an encouraging voice, to be honest, which you mentioned. You know, I really did try to be honest, because
Or honest, yes.
also writing the book was because a lot of the literature that's out there for NFP, you know, my book was aimed at people who are already using NFP. They're already well versed in NFP. They've already read something about NFP, and a lot of the literature that's out there about NFP is sort of overly rosy. It paints an overly rosy picture of it and says it's going to strengthen your marriage, it's going to improve your communication, it's going to do this for you, it's going to do that for you. And people try it and they're like, well, that's not happening. So
Yeah,
my
yeah.
book was intended to be a counterbalance to that, and it was intended to be honest, and it was intended to be you know, to talk about what the experience is really like when things aren't that great, but also to be encouraging. So I wanted it to be an encouraging book, and I wanted it to be a gentle book that let people know that it's normal to struggle with things like this, but also that part of the reason that it's struggling is because part of the reason that they are struggling is because it's important.
It isn't right.
Struggle with important things, and that it's worth struggling because it's important, and you shouldn't feel that there's something wrong with you because you're having a hard time with this. Doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with your marriage. Doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with the church, but there might be something wrong with the way that this particular thing was presented to you. So here's a different way that I'm going to present it to you. Here's a new way, not necessarily a new way, but maybe a different, more realistic and more practical way that I can present it. And I feel that in the last 10 years, there has been a lot more honest conversation around. I'm hearing people having a lot more honest conversation about the actual experience of using natural family planning. And part of that is because, as I mentioned, that people who aren't even Catholic are using it, you know.
Interesting, right? And you hear nothing about it in the media. You hear nothing about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it depends what you read. You know, I mean, if you read Cosmo magazine, you might find something about it. You're not going to find people who are abstaining. They'll probably use condoms when they're not having sex. I mean, when they're fertile. But you will find people who are tracking their cycles. I mean, there are many tracking apps that you can find that have nothing to do with Catholicism, just because you know, as I mentioned, you know, people are really tired of the side effects of hormonal contraception. So
God bless technology and that, and on the other points that you were mentioning, and all the products that you can use.
Oh yeah, and I wanted to, you know, I gave you a partial answer for speaking of the products that you can use. I mean, that's one method when you're testing your urine, but there are people who do it just through their temperature, which is sort of probably the oldest method, or one of the older methods, but it's gotten much more refined. There's a thing that you can strap to your arm, a little thermometer that you can strap to your arm overnight, and it continuously takes your temperature and sends the information to your phone. It basically does it for you, and you can, you know, boop boop, and you find a little chart, and it tells you where you are. They're working on doing reading your saliva. They have I am not interested in this, but they have a thing that you can I don't know who this is for.
Oh, come on.
all right, I'll tell you. They have a thing that reads your temperature that is not oral, that you can walk around with it inside you, and it keeps track of your temperature, and it sends information to your phone. I don't know who wants that, but
not going to ask where. All right.
You know, the body is a wonderful place, and it has many places where you can put thermometers.
All right. Again, I'm going to still go with God bless technology on that.
Yeah, sure. Why not? So yeah, so there's just a lot, and then there are people who and then if you don't want to use any technology at all, and you're not squeamish, You can also track your cervical fluid, and you can learn how to read it and say, like, oh, it's this color, it's this consistency, it stretches this much. And you can actually learn a lot. And I know people who have diagnosed other, medical problems just because, they've learned the system so well, and they brought it to their doctors, and probably not a standard doctor, but a doctor who's particularly trained in this method, and they'll say, oh, you have endometriosis, or you have
Right. Wow. So
very,
it's helped in other areas.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah, sure. Because I mean, when you think about it, your reproductive system is not just it's not this sort of discrete system that just sort of chugs away on its own. It's a big deal, and it affects all the other bodily systems that you have. So it's a little bit frustrating, because what happens to me when I go to the doctor, or when I go to the OBGYN, they kind of treat it like they treat my reproductive system as if it's like a I don't know how to describe it, but they treat it like it's like a flaw. It's like a built-in flaw that I have, because I'm a woman, and women are defective because they have this pesky fertility, and we have to learn how to turn it off, and we have to learn. And so, you can, I have had many OBGYNs try to put me on medication that I know I shouldn't be on, because I have high blood pressure, and I say, well, I can't take that, I have high blood pressure. And they look at my chart and they say, oh yeah, you're right, you probably get a blood thank you. I have a BA in literature, and I figured that out, but you have a medical degree, that's fine, whatever. But
Whatever. Right.
the point being that people, the medical field is lagging far behind where it ought to be, where women's health is concerned. I mean, that's just a fact. Women's health is treated as if women are a deviation from the norm. The male body is treated as if it's normative, and the female body is treated as if it's defective in some way, because it has all these extra little fallopian tubes and things, and ovaries, and
Right. Right.
You know what I mean? You know what I mean?
I do. Well, and then in chapter 17 you write, does God just hate women or what? And that's what you're kind of saying, in that every woman is asked that question in their life. And what is the answer? Why are we different? That's a silly question, but
I mean,
God doesn't hate women, right?
Well, no, I would say no.
You're on board with no. Okay.
I would like to register my vote as no on that one. But I think it's important. But I think, as you say, it's important for people to understand. I was writing my book. I was really hoping that men and that priests would read this book, because on the cover.
Oh yeah.
On the cover, it's kind of a weird.
It's got a confessional. There's a confessional on the cover.
And the confessional has it's basically Adam and Eve in the confessional. And you can just sort of see a shadowy figure of the priest, but you can see that he's tilting his head to listen to Eve. And that's what I really wanted. I really wanted priests to read this book, and I wanted them particularly to listen to what women are saying, because this is, just as the medical community is lagging behind, the church is also lagging behind. And that's just, it's just a thing, isn't it?
It really is.
It's just a thing. It's not a Catholic thing. It's just a thing. And I have had many priests who say that they were grateful for the book, and that they learned a lot when reading it, and that they use it in their marriage preparation classes, and that and that it's being used in seminaries now for men learning, training to become priests. Excellent. Which I was really grateful for, because I feel like this is, because people are going into the confessional with these problems, and there are these men here who have not had sex, or not in a long time anyway.
Which we hope not.
Right, exactly. And they don't know what to say, and they should. They really need to. They need to know what to say. And I think seminaries are doing better with that now. I think they recognize that it's a problem. They're getting more women involved in teaching men to understand like what the hell is going on and what, you know. So so once again, I forgot what your question was.
If God hates women.
Oh, right. Right.
We've decided he and she do not.
Right. So the purpose of the book was, first of all, to bring to people's attention the fact that many women actually feel that God does, or maybe he does, or at least that they have this haunting feeling that maybe they don't even want to admit to themselves that they feel that way, but a lot of women do feel that way. So number one, I just wanted to sort of bring that to the front. I think I wrote two chapters about that, or a 2-part chapter about it.
Yes.
And
yes.
the other thing was that I wanted to answer it in some way, because it does feel like it's a bit of a catch-22. You know, it feels like the system is rigged a little bit.
Got to do the heavy lifting.
Well, right. It feels like everything falls into our laps, and at the same time, we don't have any power to fix the problem. Like everything gets put in our laps to take care of, but we also
Right.
don't have any power to do anything about it. So, in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different aspects of our life, and the way that plays out specifically in natural family planning, I'm not sure how exactly one-to-one a relation this is, but the way that this plays out in natural family planning is that because of the way a woman's fertility cycle works out, is that if a woman is avoiding pregnancy, if she just decided, presumably, ideally, the couple has decided together that they want to avoid pregnancy, they are not going to have sex when she is fertile. And the problem with that is that when a woman is fertile, that's when she wants to have sex.
Right.
That's how bodies are made. That's how bodies are designed, because the human race wants to make more of itself.
Yes.
That's what life is like, like in Jurassic Park, the way, right? I mean, that's when, and for some women, that is the only time they actually feel like having sex. And then as soon as their fertility, the fertile part of their cycle wanes, they look at their husband and they're like, yeah, all of a sudden they're not as interested anymore.
Yeah.
So if you're in a long-term situation where you're putting off, or you're avoiding getting pregnant, maybe permanently, this can start to really feel crappy after a while, because you feel like this is what I'm looking at for the rest of my youth and beauty, is that
I know, until that point in time in our lives. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what I talk about is, first I wanted to acknowledge that was a thing, because I had never seen that acknowledged before. I had only heard it acknowledged. I had only heard people talking about the honeymoon effect, where like, wow, you build up this anticipation, and it's so wonderful because absence makes the heart grow fonder, and you're looking forward to it, and then yay, finally you can have sex, and it's so great. And it's like, sometimes that happens, but sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes what happens is you're anticipating, and then it kind of fizzles because you don't. Yeah, and then in the meantime, you can have all these misunderstandings, and that's a lot of what I deal with in the book, is the misunderstandings that can crop up when you have apparently two different aims, or two different ways of dealing with the similar aims that you have. So, I mean, to address the question of whether God hates women, what I talk about, the idea of natural family planning, its primary aim being not avoiding pregnancy necessarily, but deciding when to get pregnant, planning your family. The secondary aim of strengthening your marriage and improving your communication and growing stronger as a couple.
You offer some really great couple advice in it. So
I tried to be really practical about it, and actually offer a script of things you can actually ask each other and talk about. But one of the things that I talk about, and it was actually a friend of mine put it into very specific words. He said that men, and this is a generalization, obviously this is not going to be true for every single couple, but in general, in many cases, men Men need to have sex in order to feel loved, and women need to feel loved in order to want to have sex.
Right.
And that's, again, a broad brush, not true in every last couple, not true every last single time, but it's kind of true, you know. It sounds true, right?
Yeah.
And said that you can look at that as a sort of description of the general unfairness of things, and a description of how, like, well, this is terrible, you know. They have opposing aims, and they're never going to meet up, and this is going to be endless conflict, and you know, never the twain shall meet, and no wonder everybody's always mad at each other. Or you can look at it as an opportunity to make sure that you are looking out for each other and taking care of
Yes.
each, and putting the other person first. Because when you recognize that the other person is not exactly the same as you, that means you have to think about somebody other than yourself.
Yes. Get out of your own head and
Marriage,
think
that's what
about the other person. Yes.
right, right, exactly.
Yes.
That's what marriage is supposed to be. So,
Yes.
I mean, and it's not easy. I'm not going to say that it's easy, and I'm not going to say that it's just like, oh well, just plug in this formula and that's how to have a happy marriage. But you know, on the other hand, it's kind of true.
It is true. All right. I have one last question here. It's chapter 21. What's so natural about natural family planning is the title. And then you write later on is natural my ass. So just give me some final words on natural family planning in your book.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because when people approach it, they find that it actually feels very unnatural. They feel that it feels clunky. It feels contrary to what they want to do, and it feels like it's sort of the least natural thing in the world. It feels unnatural. It doesn't feel smooth. It doesn't feel flowing. It doesn't feel anything that they're used to recognizing as natural. And basically, what I wanted to point out is the reason that we maybe one way we can think of it as natural family planning is because it draws out the nature of things. It draws out the nature of marriage. It draws out the nature of sex. It draws out human nature. It draws out the nature of masculinity. It draws out the nature of femininity. It draws out the nature of your relationship with God. It tends to put things uh, into very strong focus. So in that sense, natural family planning is the most natural thing in the world, because it doesn't hide anything. It doesn't let you hide anything.
Yeah.
And that's and it's not always a comfortable place to be. And it's not really for the faint of heart at all, but it's exciting. It's got that
And
go.
your book gives them a really good way to look at it and explore it. And I love the book. I loved reading it and learning about natural family planning. I'm so far removed from that, so it was just something that um, even of a woman my age, it was a wonderful thing to read about. So
Oh, I'm so glad. That's a great
yeah.
compliment that someone who's not in that world would find it engaging. So thank you for
Oh,
that.
totally, totally. Oh yeah, I just flew through it. So I'm gonna say thank you, Simcha Fisher, and I am so grateful that you were our first guest on the first line. And I look forward to more books from you so we can talk further. I hope there are other books in your future. And how do we get this book? How can you buy this book?
It is on Amazon. You can buy it, or you can buy it from the publisher, Our Sunday Visitor, which is at osv.com. So it's The Sinner's Guide to Natural Family Planning. I think it's on Barnes and Noble. Oh, I did an audiobook too. So if you want to hear more of my voice, you can hear me reading. You can hear me reading the dang thing.
That's great.
Yeah, it's
That's
on
great.
the Kindle version as well. So any format.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I'm so grateful to you for speaking with us. And I hope you enjoyed it. And
I did. Thank you.
good. You brought out some great points. And so I will say thank you. And we'll get this up on indepthnh.org. And I'm going to end now, and I'll see you the next time. All right.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much.